Welcome everybody to the Modern Merchant podcast today. So super excited about this new episode that we've got coming up. Today's topic is going to be on, is the distributor dead? And we've got the same usual suspects with us today. So Travis, the CEO of Flxpoint, and Matt, our CTO of Flxpoint as well. Welcome, gentlemen.
Appreciate it. Happy to be back.
Good to be here.
Good. You guys brought this topic up to me, and it's a really important one to talk about. It's something that we kind of keep seeing popping up, and it's something to kind of discuss on, the ever changing evolution of e-commerce and technology in general. And again, we're talking about, is the distributor dead? And we're really going to talk about a couple different use cases, mainly, one, who's a distributor? How are things affecting them nowadays, the normal distributor, as well as, what's some things that's going to talk about they're going to stay alive and they're still going to be a key asset to supply chain in general when it comes to e-commerce. But really, to set the scene, let's first start and talk about who is a distributor. Obviously, distributor, vendor, supplier, all these different names get bounced around. So Travis, go ahead and give us a start and give us a quick breakdown on what is a true distributor today.
Yeah, who we're talking about when it comes to a distributor today is really, someone that is buying in bulk directly from the brands, wholesale freight purchases, right? I buy a bunch of Nikes, Under Armour, and Adidas clothes, shoes, whatever. I buy them specifically to now resell to retailers like Academy Sports, Dick's Sporting Goods, right? I'm that middleman distributor. And my value proposition traditionally has always been twofold. One, you don't have to figure out how to ship, an individual item, right? Like onesie twosies, as they refer to it, right? Like those individual shoes or that T-shirt. You don't have to have the infrastructure to do that. We've got that figured out. So the logistics sides, right? The shipping and logistics and the pick packing and all the warehousing that goes into shipping out individual items. And then two, be able to sell to retailers and get into the Dick's Sporting Goods and get into the academies and work directly with them and focus on that transaction with retailers. So distributors specifically selling to B2B, only having to do that onesie, twosie type scenario when they're drop shipping, right? If it's B2B, but that's the value is logistics, one, and the shipping and the warehousing, the pick pack and the manpower that takes to do that for individual items. And then secondly, just the distribution of their items to retailers, getting the actual sales and marketing of those brands out to the retailers. So sitting in the middle. And then the big part to take away from this is taking a percentage, right? Buying it. If they buy it for $5 from the brand, they're going to typically sell it for $10 to the retailer. And the retailer is going to typically sell it for $20 to the consumer. And so that middleman process of taking a cut out in the middle is typically the distributor from a B2B perspective. I mean, with that, that's who we're talking about, and why we're talking about the death of the distributors going away is that there is a couple different movements that's happening in distribution, and that middleman kind of sitting in the middle there and helping with those two main value propositions is kind of breaking down. One specifically because, and I'll just kind of summarize it and kick over to Max. I think he's got some really good thoughts on how we look at this. But one is, the rise of the 3PL. And okay, I'm a brand, and do I really need to sell my products at a discount to a distributor when I could just store them in a warehouse more cost effectively and have more ownership over those items, right? I'm Nike. I want to make sure that I'm selling directly to the retailer, directly to the consumer, and I'm not selling my items to some middleman who might go sell to other channels I'm not familiar with or okay with, or at a price that's not all right with me. So the rise of the third-party logistics warehouse and storing your items in somewhere that you still own it, but they take care of logistics, is the number one reason why. Secondly, the rise of just them going direct to consumer because of better technology and intelligent parcel shipment, be able to ship that onesie, twosie, allowing you to go direct to consumer. Might as well just do that directly to retailer, which is even easier. And then lastly is just getting in front of retailers easier. So I just talked about two logistical items, but now lastly, it's like, if I'm a brand, I can get in front of the large retailers a little bit easier than I could 5-10 years ago because of social media, building my brand. A lot of these retailers might be reaching out directly to me now. You don't need a distributor going to all these trade shows, hawking my brand, talking about my brand in front of retailers. So that's why we're having this podcast today. And that's why we're talking about it, is those external forces are happening, kind of forcing out the distributor in some industries.
It's perfect. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's actually three levels to this. One is a distributor, like, is a distributor dead? And the counter argument to that could be because of the rise of 3PLs. But there's also another section where even 3PLs are sometimes getting cut out these days, where, I kind of look at this equation with the idea of outsourcing your supply chain versus owning it. And some would say that if you have a 3PL, you kind of own that supply chain, but it could also be like, there's a lot of companies, like one that came to mind is Dollar Shave Club, where they actually started with a 3PL and they just recently, well, I don't know if it's recent, but they swapped it to, they actually own their supply chain now, where they don't even use a 3PL anymore. And they did that for, cost-effective reasons and all that type of stuff. But, just to focus on the distributors, we can kind of isolate this into chunks. It really is that it is the value of a distributor, are they useful anymore in today's day and age? And it's a tough question to answer, but I would say, one of the key points to me is, that product catalog. So you have a distributor and they have many different catalogs or many different product lines in their catalog. And, that's valuable to some people, where you want to get like maybe home decor and you want, different patio furniture and different, internal furniture. And so maybe as a reseller, it's a good idea to go with that. But there's definitely a lot of brands right now that are kind of stamping out their mark, where they're solely focusing on, we sell patio furniture and we're going to go direct to consumer. We're going to use a 3PL, and we don't actually need to leverage a distributor for those reasons, because even with distribution like that, you still have to essentially sell them the products. And if a lot of times distributors will have deals where if they don't actually sell a product within a certain time frame, right, they'll kick it back to you and you have to recoup that. So I don't know. I like answering the question of more just outsourcing your supply chain versus owning it. I have a lot on that, but
real quick, I want to just double click into the whole
sure
catalog, because that's a part I didn't really, we've got this whole case against that we want to get into, but that is probably one of the best cases against distributors going away, is that it is super valuable to have a bunch of different items from multiple brands under one warehouse that you have access to from a dropship perspective, right? And right now, owning your supply chain, like you're saying, is the only way to do that is to bring it all in and to bring it into your own warehouse. If you want to outsource your supply chain and do something more cost effectively, the other option is to just work with a distributor that has all of that, all of those home, they've got, patio, right, the furniture, whatever it might be. And they've got that. And then because the alternative, what I'm talking about is that the rise of 3PLs are killing the distributor. Okay, you have to still have to buy all that stuff initially and take on all that inventory risk, then go put it in a 3PL. And then secondly, if you want to work directly with brands, I can't do that. I have to, if I want to drop ship in this scenario and I want to still outsource my supply chain and be more flexible, like we talked about in past podcasts, there's no way to, if you get an item or an order and it's got 3 different brands on it and 3 different types of items coming from 3 different warehouses, and you have to drop ship all of those, we know that's a recipe for disaster for shipping fees. So I think that's important that you brought that up, is like that large catalog under one warehouse that can be shipped out cost effectively that you don't have to own. That's definitely a case against it kind of going away.
Yeah, for sure.
I think we have audio back, guys. I think this works.
That's great for a podcast.
Right. Okay, so let's end up moving on to the next one here. And I was trying to pick up everything, on what you guys were talking about. And from what I see, keeping on track, especially we were talking about distributors, right? And you started talking about this, Travis, on the specific industries. We were talking about this a little bit beforehand on there are going to be certain industries that, and you might have hit on this a little bit earlier as well, as like the certain industries that, we're going to have to rely on those distributors because they've got the logistical side things down and pat. And some examples were the grocery larger items, firearms, all the different nuanced things that we see for certain industries. Travis, what are your thoughts on some of those? Maybe grab one of those examples, for instance.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we've already seen this direct to consumer and this kind of direct relationship between brands and retailers happen a lot more in like clothing and apparel and stuff like that. That's easier to kind of facilitate light shipping. But industries that still do have very specific logistical challenges, like grocery, right? Keeping things frozen and just the shipment of frozen goods or perishable items in general. That value from a distributor is large enough that we don't see this question coming up really as quickly or anytime soon, because that value that we're talking about maybe breaking down is very much there in grocery. Large items in general, retailers, going back to Matt's owning versus outsourcing, even if you are a large Home Depot or someone, a Target or someone like that, you can definitely own your supply chain. And there's a lot of reasons why you want to, for the control and the efficiency that you gain and the competitive advantage of being, really good at fulfillment and having that catalog all to yourself, that you physically own already. So there's great things there, but they still outsource the large item stuff, right? And so they're still going to buy that. They don't want to take a whole grill and put it, they're only going to have like 5 or 6 grills on their floor. And then they only take up so much in their warehouse of like a large safe or whatever. So they're still going to work with a distributor on large item stuff that they don't want to have and own and take up the space. And then lastly, there's like specialty items like firearms, but even like jewelry or high value items, things like that you just don't want to buy, or one, you just don't want to store and take on all that inventory risk. So, we started this with, there's all this, there is talk about this like thinning or at least streamlining of the supply chain. But I think there's a lot of distributors out there that can rest safe in that they add enough value today in certain industries and continue to, as long as they stay focused on adding that value and they're not disrupted too much based on all the different factors we've just talked about.
Yeah. I always feel like that grocery side of things is like almost one of the hardest things to do, right? Like how many times have we heard of a specific distributor, not going to name any names, but they're doing drop ship, right? They've got these high-end retailers doing high volume and they can't handle the high volume. And so now they're trying to send out packages. It could be even a half a day late, 2 days late. And now the end customer is getting soured goods, right? Something that needed to be refrigerated, like all these different stuff that you're just now kind of imploding on different businesses, and people are going to go to new distributors if you can't keep up with that. Matt, what do you think? What's your thoughts on the different industries here?
Yeah, and the industries are tough. Obviously, perishable is an outlier where you require a certain level of care and quality and really special equipment, right? Refrigerated vans or, like packaging that's will last several hours or days. Firearms, that's kind of another one where, FFL licensing and having a physical location to be able to distribute that can make a big difference. I think just in general, like, I don't really have specifics about industries, to be honest. There's obviously some outliers that make a great case for being a distributor and give you a lot of opportunities to provide value by being in those industries. But I was just going to comment on, to me, like one of the main value props of a distributor is capital, right? Like it just seems like and that could be applied for various industries, right? But like if you're choosing to go with a distributor, you don't have to have that upfront capital investment, right? If you're choosing to 3PL, even though technically like some might not consider that like owning your supply chain because you're still outsourcing, your warehousing space and whatnot, you're still having to make a conscious decision to purchase and put upfront capital in place in order to get those items into your warehouse, right? And so maybe this is more for the previous question, but I just feel like that's one of the biggest value props to me. Like, if you're actually starting a business or you're in e-commerce and you need to kind of warehouse these goods, distributors probably won't go away for like the experimentation phase or for this concept of, I'm just getting started and I don't want to have to go and purchase all of these items, right, and store them in my warehouse. It's almost like you start with a distributor and kind of make your choice picks on which ones that you'd like to invest in after the fact.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So let's go ahead down into the next one. And this is, I think you guys could probably ramble on for a while on this next question. And Travis, will start with you. But any parting thoughts, that you guys are looking at, and something that we can kind of look towards the future when it comes to distributors, right? I know there's a handful of different stuff here that you guys can go on about, but what are some thoughts that we might look at in the future, and maybe some predictions, right, on our distributors going away, are they not, different pitfalls and things like that? Go ahead, Travis.
Well, it's more like, how does the distributor word evolve, the term and the value that they add, and how does the model change now that warehouse space and the, it's almost commoditized, and every VC I follow on LinkedIn is investing in a new third-party, logistics company and warehousing space and things like that. And, you're seeing Ship Hero and other companies like that actually integrate their software and then supply the actual inventory the actual warehouses past that, and like outsourcing and commoditizing the technology that distributors always kind of touted. So it's like, there is definitely disruption here, but it comes down to, like, there will always be a middleman, right? I love that quote. I think it was DMX that said it. There will always be a middleman. The market decides who that is, but there will always be a middleman. RIP DMX. But
Too soon.
Really, I always hit home with me, especially in the industry we're in that the distributor will just change a little bit, right? And I haven't thought through this too much, but like, what if there is a new model of, you're a 3PL. It's almost like not even a new model, consignment, the consignment model, right? There is consignment in previous, brick and mortar, and I'm still today, where you just basically are advertising. And I'm sure Amazon probably does I think Amazon does have like a consignment arm, but I don't hear a lot of it in our industry. I don't run into a lot of people who are in this kind of like, put all of your stuff as a 3PL in here. But then also we'll advertise it, but we don't own it, right? We'll do all that. So it's basically the exact distributor model, but they don't buy it at a discount. They just take the 3PL. So I don't know. It's probably happening today. Maybe there's something I'm not thinking about where it's completely just a stupid idea and it doesn't make any sense. But, if you can make money as a 3PL just off these per order fees, you feel like it would be advantageous for you to then now advertise the items you have in your warehouse the same way a distributor does, but never take on any of the risk of actually buying them, and give more margin long-term to the brand. And so it's like a pass-through distributor that still adds value in both the same ways that they traditionally added value, but they don't take on the risk of actually owning them. So there's probably some more complexity in like the exchanging of hands and selling it back and all that kind of stuff. But it's basically the consignment model. So it'll be interesting to see that, if that is a thing. I think it is with Amazon today, but like it becomes more popular, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you're kind of talking about like a virtual distributor, right? Where it definitely does exist to some extent. Like you could look at maybe like Doba might be an example of that, or even USD to some extent.
But they don't store. That almost all pure dropship, right? US Direct's all pure dropship, like adding the other piece of the value. But you're right; it's halfway there.
Yeah, right. It's the idea that I'm going to aggregate. In that case, it's off distributors, but whether it's 3PLs or distributors, it's kind of like I'm advocating for inventory that I haven't put the upfront capital on. But and as a result, there's generally going to be more fees associated with the purchase, right? So some sort of order fee or ship fee or something like that will go as just a fixed cost with that. But you're right, the value of advertising.
Yeah, it's what 3PLs do today. They say, we'll store your stuff and then we'll just charge you for orders as they come in. And you tell me when you have an order. But they would also, on top of that, say, we also have our own sales channels. There's another value add where we could probably sell your stuff that's in our warehouse as well. And I don't know how much of that is happening. I think Amazon does that for sure. I don't think how much of that is happening where they don't actually own it. And it's probably because 3PLs are like, hey, we run a business. It's called warehousing. And that's all we do. We don't do this advertising arm. But I'm curious, if I had the option, all things equal, as a brand, and someone said, yeah, here's my warehouse, I'll store it for you, and I'll do it just as good as the next 3PL, but I'll also drive more revenue because I have X, Y, and Z partnerships to drive sales, I'd probably go with them. Like I said, Amazon does it. I'm almost positive, but I'm curious. I don't see a lot of 3PLs doing it. And then Matt, I want to get your thoughts on, this is just getting a little out there, but you know, I've been like, you know, looking into NFT stuff like everyone else has, and just keeping like more like digital records of digital records of digital things is really what NFTs are about right now. But there's also this like kind of heady concept of just, you know, the digital record of a physical thing, and just maintaining, like you could say I own something physically, you know, whether it's via NFT or whatever, but almost like having, you know, warehouses specifically that own like the chain of custody of who owns like high-end art or whatever. And for whatever reason, you don't want to hang it up in your house. There's people out there like this, not me, not like a lot of people I know, but I would buy like, you know, a couple $1 million piece of art, and I just want it stored away somewhere. Maybe it's for appreciating or whatever. And with NFTs, or maybe there's probably just stuff today, you know, for physical goods, NFTs just be like a vanity way of tracking the ownership of it. But actual, not necessarily distributors, but like storage of ownership of items, and then facilitate the transaction of these high value items. I don't know. I'm just curious if you know of that today that I'm not thinking about, or if you're kind of following me on that at all. If I'm just getting out there too far.
I get the idea. I've actually never heard of that. Are you saying those exist today, or you're curious like around that concept, if that would be?
I'm sure there's definitely storage units right today.
Sure.
I think the step in the next direction in my mind is someone that facilitates the buying and selling of items and the storage of it and the transaction of it. And then, you know, maybe leveraging some digital token to authenticate who actually owns this specific item.
Like the blockchain? Is that, is that where we're going?
That's where we're going. That's what NFTs are built on, right? I mean, but
yeah.
And just like that, I guess my thought is if the blockchain and NFT type technology will enable easily managing the ownership of items, if a new model will come out of managing the ownership of expensive items, and then layering on the actual physical, you know, storage of it.
Storage.
Right now, you typically, you know, you own something in your physical possession is like 9/10 of the law, right?
Right.
Like,
right.
If someone else can tell and say like, no, I know for a fact that, you know, you own this, and then they have the storage of actually keeping it safe for you. You can see a business model evolving from that.
Yeah, I could. I mean, to me, the valuable aspect of that is the authenticity of the purchase and the ownership. To like think about like a baseball signature, or, you know, some sports memorabilia that was from 1970s or 80s or whatever. And, you know, today, like, I'm sure you guys have seen Pawn Stars, and you watch them bring in the documents and they say it was traced back to this person or whatever. And, you know, the way that they validate that in most cases, I mean, obviously it's a TV show, but I'm sure this is pretty standard in real life too. You actually have experts come in and that know the signatures, and they're able to like compare the handwriting and understand where it originated from, and try to estimate that, yeah, that seems like an appropriate place and time frame. But the certificates of authenticity today, to some extent, are kind of like, okay, you know, is that real, or is that just kind of a and so I see a lot of value in authenticity and being able to vet that. The storage of it, to me, maybe that's kind of like a stretch. Maybe for like expensive items, there's some sort of security that they can offer, but it might facilitate something like that in the future. It's you know, it's one of those trends that's hard to say.
Baseball card thing is interesting because, like, once again, if you're trading stuff in the way that I'm thinking of, like art and baseball cards and things like that, it's almost always physically traded, which slows down the amount of trading. And so if you're able to take physical goods that have inherent value and fluctuate quickly, you know, right now you do that obviously with stocks and like more digital trading. There's even like, you can trade on like athletes, right? There's like markets out there for that, and
right.
It's all about physically exchanging it. But like, you could, if you said, hey, I don't really care, you don't need to send it to me, as long as I know I trust this place to store it, and I trust that they know it's mine, and I have some kind of NFT that proves it, and I feel I have enough trust in that, because I'm not trusting the signature and some pawns back that far. I think there might be like there might be new markets, like the baseball. As a great example, the baseball trading market could blow up, and there could start being like frequency trading of Mickey Mantle stuff happening constantly. And that physical card is actually in a physical warehouse, and then the ownership of it is just trading via an NFT.
Yeah, to kind of connect this back to the distributor, we see today that like Amazon right now, for example, if I want to go sell a certain type of product on Amazon, I have to have some sort of certificate of authenticity to confirm that I'm eligible to sell those type of items or, you know, that specific product. Yeah. And so it is interesting to think about, like when we're talking about is a distributor dead, like ways that they might evolve might be in that realm, right? Because the distributor today kind of to some extent is discouraged from selling on Amazon because of that authenticity piece where you have to have the physical item. Yeah. They're kind of creating a barrier of this virtual process where I'm aggregating 3PLs or I'm aggregating distributors or something, and I'm selling those on my Amazon store. It takes a lot of due diligence for that person to physically connect that they are eligible and approved to sell those items, let's say. And so to kind of bring it circle, I could imagine that expands, like the authenticity piece is something that maybe distributors have to adapt in the future, right? Like in order to kind of continue to thrive and sell on these other various channels that are so restrictive with them.
That's a great point. And thanks, bringing us back out from way out there in Pawn Stars and NFTs. But it's a good point. And we kind of talked about this before, where it's like the blockchain type, technology we talk about, like all the actual practical use cases versus the hype of, authenticity is a big issue in our industry. And
for sure.
That could be like the third leg of the value, right? Logistics, actual marketing and distribution of your products. And then now, authenticity and managing that across multiple sales channels.
Yeah, for sure.
Value point. Yeah, I like that.
Getting real deep in the pawn shop stuff. It's funny because it's so true though. I follow a lot of vintage sports accounts, and they buy and sell not trading cards, but more so like memorabilia and apparel, hats, and things like that. And it's an interesting thought. You guys have any other closing thoughts kind of on the distributors dead? Anything that we want to talk about? Maybe we want to, I don't know, let's just start talking about DMX since we brought him up.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things that are, so we've talked about a distributor here and how people may be opting, these days to use like a 3PL instead. But I found the idea that Dollar Shave Club, like, I don't know why I was fascinated by that kind of story where, first thing I'll say to kind of preface this is like, the idea of a distributor makes a lot of sense at the start. And even a 3PL makes a lot of sense at the start because 3PL is kind of mid-tier. So you could think about, say I'm starting a business and I want to be able to sell products. Maybe I have other value props too, like informational or whatever. The easiest, lowest barrier to entry is a distributor. It's kind of like the stepping stone to getting more advanced and embedded in the pipeline. Whereas like the second step is like, maybe I want to actually own some of those. So a natural progression path might be, I start with a distributor, I make some sales, I find the products or items that are selling the most. I place bulk orders for those and send to my 3PL now. And now I use that 3PL as my primary, like anytime I can fulfill out of there, I do that instead because there's less fees associated with that. And then eventually you hit a point where like Dollar Shave Club hit, where they were using this 3PL. They actually upgraded to a new 3PL. And at the end of the day, they decided that it's time for us to take everything in-house. And that topic is really interesting to me, where it's kind of like what Apple does today, right? Like even in modern times, Apple is deciding to stop using Intel processors in their PCs or in their computers or MacBooks. And they're starting to actually build their own processor to embed in those. And so another kind of a slightly different topic along the same tune is outsourcing versus in-house supply chain management entirely, right? And what are the value props of that? So when I first thought about this topic, immediately I started gravitating towards Dollar Shave Club, towards like Apple versus Microsoft, where Apple owns basically everything in their supply chain as much as they can. And everything that they don't own, they're trying to continue to advance into that. And Dollar Shave Club is kind of copying that model right now, where they're starting to build out their own logistics and stuff. And I just started to think about the problems with that, but also the advantages. And I kind of ended on this idea that it almost just looks like a progression path where the best solution is to own everything, but it's so intensive to do that. And it's so hefty of an investment, the capital that you have to do and the time it takes to build all the infrastructure out yourself, that I don't see like the distributor dying or the 3PL dying, for example, until we no longer have newcomers, right? It's kind of my thought, where it's like, as long as you have new people entering the industry, it just seems like those are the stepping stones that you need to take in order to even become somewhat of a successful business, right? And so it's kind of more of a heady thought, but I was thinking about that.
Well, and you need to gain, like, that's a good point, right? If we're ever going to get rid of newcomers, like it's always going to be a thing, and it all comes down to trust when it comes to that specific brand. I mean, Dollar Shave Club, I remember when they weren't a thing, right? And then they started popping up. You started seeing commercials, and you're just like, what? Like, who's this? Like, I'm, we're not all used to this when it comes to shaving. It's like you go to CVS or, Publix or wherever, and you go and get your stuff from big brands like Gillette and things like that. So it's like, it's that whole trust factor of, you need to build trust for you to have that type of model. And that's just going to take time.
And what I think Matt said is pretty interesting. Like, and I kind of want to push back to him on the progression path. I don't think there's an end there though, Matt. I think it's almost more like it's a cycle, right? Where you get good at something, and to the point, or you decided that you are large enough or have enough resources to take something in-house that you feel strongly is a competitive advantage, and you do. And as long as your business is still progressing, you're probably going to reach that point again in another area, right? Because the outsourcing allows you to go wide, or allows you to go wide. And then the insourcing, or like taking something in-house, handling it yourself, allows you to go deep, and like really good deep. And I think it'd be interesting once you go deep in one thing, whether it's logistics or whatever, if they want to go wider to another catalog or internationally or whatever, they might have to do the same thing. Start with a distributor, and then when they get there, then they're going to buy a warehouse. So it's like, as long as you keep progressing your business, I think you're going to pretty much, you might run out of it in the context we're talking about, like distribution, but I could see it evolving pretty quickly as far as like a business as a whole. You can make that argument that I've outsourced something until I determine it's a competitive advantage. Then I bring it in-house and I move on to the next thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a cycle amongst like many different variables, right? It's like, I'm going to in-house this variable, and then eventually I might grow to the point where this other variable, now I need to like worry about in-housing that. Another really good example of that might be like Tesla, right? Where they ended up buying a battery making company because they needed better batteries, and they need to innovate in the battery realm and research. I just watched a video the other day about them coming out with this like a brand new concept of a battery that's lighter weight, longer lasting, and like kind of takes a different approach of how to build a battery, right? And so they hit this point where they're like, okay, these batteries are good enough to get us these products that we want to launch, but if we want to get longer lasting vehicles, if we want to start getting into aeronautics and actually like creating airplanes with batteries and things, we have these restrictions, and so they then opt to bring those in-house, right? But I think the general cycle, even though it is a cycle with different variables, right? It's like, it seems like in-housing is always the more efficient route, right? It seems like it, at least long term, when you look at things in the very long term. But the investment and the capital and just the bandwidth of your team, it might not make sense to even approach that in the near term, right? But like, if you had the resources at your disposal, and if you could in-house everything, you can make everything to spec exactly how you want it. But it's more that's such it can be very daunting depending on what you're trying to in-house. Like, maybe I'm trying to in-house my development for my my app or something like that. And that now I have to build a whole dev team. And the second that app starts scaling, now I have to build a network engineering team and a infrastructure team and DevOps. And so it's one of those things that it's probably always better to in-house it long term if that's like a core competency to your business. Yeah. But it's just so there's a big barrier to do that, right? And you have to kind of decide if that's worth tackling or not.
Yeah, that's the key point. Is it sounds like and I'm agreeing with you, like it's the end goal for anything that your company has determined is a core competency and a competitive advantage. And you have to pick and choose what's our competitive advantages, and then which one can we afford with limited resources to bring in-house. But yeah, you're never going to have, so let me caveat it with the kind of final part with like bringing it back to the distributor. As long as you feel like it's a competitive advantage, and we've touched on this in other podcasts, where like it can't be deemed a commodity, right? It can't be deemed a commodity. So like the only way that a distributor or like warehousing or you know, whatever kind of want to end on here with, you know, the value that a distributor adds is not to the point of a commodity. Because it's the same thing. Zappos is the same thing as Dollar Shave Club, and you know, basically said like, I want to bring all my stuff in house, because the only reason they did that is because it's not all warehousing and fulfillment is the same. And there's some things where it gets to the point where it just about everything, you know, we're not going to, as a tech company, not going to manufacture our own computers because we can work faster, right? But if we, you know, the only way that distributors will kind of phase out, or just that whole model in general would be or owning versus outsourcing would be if they could just made it to where it's like makes no sense whatsoever for you to do your own warehousing.
Right.
Outside of the distributor kind of talk, just owning versus kind of.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. And one thing that and I agree with you guys as well. I think what's going to start really hurting my big thing is who's going to start hurting the distributors is once brands become easier and easier to work with, right? And people can just go straight to the brands and make better margins that way rather than going through a middleman distributor. But at the same time, if distributors make it easier and easier to work with from a data perspective, then these online companies are going to stop doing it in-house, because they got to, I mean, think about all the costs you have to take on of owning a warehouse, teams, packaging, like all that stuff. And the better they get at data, the better they're going to be like, it just makes sense to outsource regardless and not bring it in-house if the margins are there. So kind of my final thoughts there. What do you guys have? Any other final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll kick it over to Matt, but I guess my final thing is just, you know, these are fun to kind of talk about. You know, hopefully people will find these interesting. You know, the idea with this podcast and some of these that we're doing is, you know, just kind of like talking out loud about what, you know, there's several things that I'm probably going to regret saying that sounded really stupid about so certain potential ideas in the future, but we'd love to hear, you know, whether you see this tomorrow or 5 years from now, we'd love to see your comments and like just talk about this kind of stuff, because we're really interested in just kind of, you know, BSing around what's potentially could happen, or, you know, how people think about these kinds of things.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean, obviously, is a distributor dead? The answer right now is no. And, you know, it might in the future, who knows? There's obviously a lot of competitive advantages, like even just like we briefly touched on it, like this idea of, I don't know what you would call this, like product trialing, kind of, where you essentially have a distributor out there and I have my own maybe in-house inventory, or I have a site that I have, and I'd like to hook into this distributor to trial out if some of these products are of any interest to my customers, right? And then decide if I want to invest more in those. And so just in that realm, like I can see a lot of value in them long term, right? And just to understand what's a good fit. And, you know, I'd like to see if these products are any interest, because there's no way for me to validate that unless I get sales on them. And, you know, I don't actually want to go and purchase all those. And so even seasoned and veteran kind of retailers would find a value in a distributor in that realm, right? So that they don't have to take on that capital investment, that risk associated with that.
And I think a side note on that too, because that's a good point, right? We kind of already talked about this, but we talk about working with brands. If brands make it easier, cut out the middleman where retailers can work directly with them, then that's going to hurt a distributor. But almost virtual distributors like US Direct, like Doba, like some of these other guys that are very transparent of like, we use these distributors. These are big distributors that work with these big brands, and we use them to fulfill. And you know that. So you're going to go out there and sell these specific, I don't know, let's stick on the laptop train, right, through a distributor. you start making sales, you start seeing how this works. Well, guess what? We work with this person. So you can now go work with them and not use us anymore and make a better margin. And then now you're doing that ever evolving of stepping stone. And how many times have we talked about that when we started US Direct? It is kind of like that graduation program of you're getting your feet wet. Now you're kind of getting your knees wet. Now you're waist deep. And it's like kind of that stepping stone of figuring out your exact, supply chain that works for you.
Yep. Agreed. So we'll probably see him around for a long time, but it is interesting to theorize what the future holds.
Yeah. And it'll be fun to listen to this a year from now, maybe a couple of years from now.
I'll be running high frequency baseball card trading.
Blockchain. We'll just be like, hey, let's do a podcast on blockchain, and Travis is going to run it. That's great. Guys, anything else? Anything we can think of? DMX, blockchain. I like where this is going. I think we should keep up the small little nuggets and tangents.
No, I like it. I think this was a good one. And like I said, just to kind of to riff off and BS, and I don't think we need to beat the horse dead completely.
No, exactly. And if you're tuning in, right, you're giving this a listen, let us know your thoughts. I mean, we have a little bit of a different perspective, from where we're coming from. And I think it'd be interesting to get more people involved, right? Should I be like, hey, like in the comments below, like all that good stuff.
It's your boy, Austin.
Gosh, I'm never going to get away from that, which I've never said. So, all right, guys. Well, thanks for jumping on. We had a little bit of audio issue at the beginning. No worries. We'll get a recording up, make it all look good. We're just refining this podcast, but stay tuned for the next one next Tuesday. Tune in 5:00 p.m. Travis, Matt. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Appreciate it.
Cool.
Thanks, man.
Yep, thanks
all right. See you, everybody.
See ya.